Não sei se eu depois consegue ver. Não tem que ser bastante. Também. Das câmaras é fantástico. Podemos começar, estamos com a emissão ao vivo, por isso convinha ficarmos a horas. Antes de mais nada, obrigada por estarem presentes. É sempre, pelo menos para mim, e acho que para muita gente, um grande prazer poder ser aqui no CINANIMA. O CINANIMA é o Festival Internacional de Animação em Espinho, contou desta vez com a sua 46ª edição, e é extremamente gratificante mesmo ver que Portugal, neste momento, está a produzir, se calhar, um dos melhores, está a viver um dos seus melhores momentos a nível da animação. Há muitos filmes portugueses a serem realizados, há muita gente com muito talento e é de ver, pelo menos a exposição, as várias exposições que o CINANIMA neste momento tem em Espinho. Comigo está o Johnny, dos representantes do CINANIMA, que vai-vos falar um bocadinho sobre a programação que está a acontecer durante esta semana, e depois vai poder apresentar aquele que vai ser o nosso convidado da Masterclass de hoje. Bem?
Muito obrigado. Mais uma vez, queremos agradecer à ESAD por nos convidar para estar juntos e fazer esta Masterclass. E pegando um pouco nas palavras da Marta, um dos grandes destaques deste ano é mesmo a animação portuguesa, porque tornou-se completamente inevitável falar sobre a animação portuguesa, porque é que ela é tão forte e como é que chegamos a este ponto e aquilo que ela poderá vir a ser no futuro. Chegamos a um ponto muito curioso, temos várias longas-metragens portuguesas a concurso. Em 5 competitivas temos 2 portuguesas e uma terceira, que é uma co-produção portuguesa.
Muito bem.
Portanto, o domínio, digamos assim, de Portugal acaba por ser algo quase inusitado e surpreendente, mas que merece o maior destaque possível. E para além da animação portuguesa, nós temos vários outros pontos de destaque. O cinema este ano quer perspectivar um pouco o futuro e apresentamos toda uma série de exposições e instalações a tentar mostrar tudo aquilo que o cinema da animação pode ser, as diferentes vertentes e perspectivas. Para isso temos várias instalações no Centro Multimédia. Temos o CINANIMA com mostras de realidade aumentada, videomapping e vários outros estilos, e na piscina temos as próprias instalações também da ESAD.
É verdade. Temos a exposição dos alunos da pós-graduação de Ilustração e Animação, da ESAD, mas o mais importante é...
Os Demónios do Meu Avô.
Exatamente.
Temos a exposição baseada na longa-metragem do Noviato, e eu gostava imenso que tivessem a oportunidade de visitar a exposição e o próprio festival em si.
Claro que sim. Só para ter um bocadinho para eles. Para quem é apaixonado por animação de volumes, a exposição do Noviato é uma delícia, uma delícia. Temos todos os personagens, temos as várias maquetes feitas pelo menos em 3 tamanhos diferentes. É possível ver o making-of, por isso é uma visita daquelas que assim, é mesmo imprescindível para quem gosta deste mundo da animação. E é uma oportunidade única de vermos, no caso, temos ali a representação de uma parte muito específica de Portugal, que é retratada, toda ela em modelos de barro, feitos de barro, ou pastas de Portugal. E é mesmo uma tradução típica dos caretos transmontanos, de uma aldeia transmontana, e da história de uma criança que vivia com o avô e que, pronto, não vou contar o resto da história. Exatamente. Mas que vivia toda a história com o avô e é realmente uma delícia. E o trabalho é muito bonito.
Até que ponto é fiel à reprodução daqueles modelos da aldeia completa.
Exatamente.
Todos os detalhes das lojas, das máquinas assustadoras, às couves, aos carros.
Às couves, exatamente.
É um nível de minúcia de trabalho que na tela é impressionante. E o filme vai passar na quinta-feira à tarde.
Às 6h30.
Mas ver em detalhes os bastidores e a construção que levou aquilo tudo é ainda mais impressionante.
Muito bem. Está tudo então? Pronto, vamos passar àquilo que é mais importante, porque temos do outro lado aqui do ecrã alguém à nossa espera, que está no Canadá, e é exatamente então o Chris Robinson. Eu vou passar já pelo menos a imagem para vocês o conseguirem ver. Hello, Chris.
Hello.
Ok. Isso, just a short introduction. O Chris, antes de mais nada, é um escritor, mas também é o diretor artístico do Festival Internacional de Ottawa no Canadá. É uma das pessoas também com uma excelente reputação e com um excelente trabalho realizado no mundo da animação. E ele hoje vai nos dar uma masterclass muito orientada, muito direcionada para o mundo da animação feita em colagem. Está bem? So Chris, welcome. Thank you very much for being with us. I know it's quite soon in Canada. For us, it's already more than 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So welcome, and the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
All right. So everybody can hear me okay there?
Yes.
Yes. Well, sorry, I was supposed to be there. Unfortunately, life got in the way, so I couldn't get there this week, but I'm here all week virtually. So I'm going to talk about collage animation. This is something that's been obsessing me for a few years, maybe because I was bored during the pandemic. I'm not really sure. I'm in the middle of writing a book about collage animation and put some notes together. So I'm going to just talk a little bit about the evolution of collage. I don't think of this as a master class. I'm no master. It's like a minor class or half minor. I don't know. Just my musings on collage. I'm going to take you through a little bit of the history of collage art, collage animation, introduce you to some of the key figures. And then I think it's on Friday during the festival, there'll be a screening I put together of collage films that features some of the people I'm talking about. All right, does that make sense? Yes. Oh, you're all muted, that's why. Okay.
So you can hear us. Yes, I think you have to hear us. Okay.
Do I know anybody there?
Yes.
All right. Now, hello to the millions of YouTube people who are obviously signed in and watching this. All right, so here I go. I'm going to bear with me. This is a bit complicated because I have to use a couple of screens here for this keynote thing. So here we go. And we can take some questions at the end. All right. So you should see my screen now, right?
Nope, not yet.
Not yet?
Not yet? Okay.
Yes. Yes.
There we go. So for me, there's something kind of playful, violent, provocative, rebellious, and accessible about collage. You know, it's anyone can do it. And for the most part, most of us have done it. And whether it's in your early years of school or at home with scrapbooks and photo albums. And collage kind of straddles these many intersections, particularly between what some call high art and low art. Between professional and amateur. Picasso did it, and you know, your grandmother probably did it. Collage art, that is. As a child, and I'm sure it's the case with many of you, one of my first encounters in art or with arts was cut and paste in like kindergarten class. Later, when I was a teenager, I had like a scrapbook where I cut and pasted assorted images and texts from sports magazines and newspapers because I was a bit of a hockey fanatic. And it was a way to, I guess, preserve, to make something that wasn't mine, my own. Maybe there's something related to mortality about it all, this desperate desire to preserve, to keep something from fading from memory. When I was an older, like late teens, I was in music bands around Ottawa, and like all bands, at least in the 80s, everybody made these cut and paste, photocopy, collage posters. As a child, you know, I saw, I think many people of my generation Our first exposure to sort of non-Disney, non-Warner Brothers animation was probably Terry Gilliam and Monty Python. You know, and for me, books, I've always liked writers that sort of blend fact and fiction, and found that quite often by doing that, you can create a deeper, something new and take you to a deeper truth. And there's just something really deliciously destructive about collage. You get to rip shit up and kind of piece it back together into whatever you want. And that's kind of beautiful in a way. As I was diving into the use of collage in animation, I was sort of struck by the lack of attention given to it. For the most part, collage animators have been lumped in with experimental cinema, with the art gallery scene, or they're tossed in with other experimental animators, or placed in a cutout context that doesn't really fit. Many cutout artists like Lotte Reiniger, for example, she was using material she created for a specific project. It's not really, you know, collage work. Now, trying to define, compartmentalize, label, pull together collage animation is a little bit like trying to break a stone with your thumb. It's a fool's task. Clearly, I'm a fool. But, you know, it's no wonder it's difficult, because a technique that's rooted in disruption and destruction shouldn't be easy. But here I go. I will give it a try. Now, starting with, you know, the word collage is itself kind of problematic. It's a bit of a ubiquitous word that could mean montage. And montage is sort of more of a cinema thing, you know, like Eisenstein, Esther Shub, Bruce Conner, Peter Cherkasky, Arthur Lipset. That's sort of placing seemingly disparate, ready-made images next to each other. There's photo montage, which is generally what I'm more focused on, which is using cut up photos and illustrations. There's decollage, which is really kind of the opposite of collage, because it's about tearing up something original to create a meaning. There's assemblage, sort of a 3D. That's improvising with whatever materials happen to be around. Is there a volume problem?
No, it's okay.
We
We'll,
lost you for a second, yeah.
yeah, but it's okay now.
I think.
It's okay?
Yes, yes, please continue.
Okay. I don't have to start from the beginning?
No,
Okay.
just a second.
No, please. So there's bricolage, there's digital collage, you know, today there's cut and paste, cutout, memes, GIFs, deep fake. Collage is kind of everywhere today. And collage has existed long before it became an art form, at least as far back as the 12th century Japan. There were calligraphers copying poems onto sheets that were made of a bunch of irregularly shaped and tinted papers. In Persia, in the 13th century, leather makers were cutting up leather to use for book bindings. There was apparently even a guy, I can't remember what century this was, who made a coffin and covered it with buttons and hooks and ladies' garters. You know, and of course, there's photo albums, postcards, scrapbooks. And as early as the 1800s, school children were learning to cut out materials to create new work. Photo montage also sort of emerged in the late 1800s, generally in a photojournalist context. In short, collage was primarily the domain of crafts, hobbies, and folk art. Sorry for the poor quality of images, but that's what you do when you steal them off the internet in true collage form. In terms of fine art, most pinpoint Georges Braque and Pablo Picasso as kind of the pioneers of collage art, though there's people who'd argue that collage art existed before in the form of Victorian photo collage. In terms of the art world, collage was primarily associated with surrealist, Dada, Cubist movements. It tended towards the abstract, the absurd, and non-linear, a trend that pretty much continues in virtually every collage animation. Collage was also a reaction against painting. You didn't need formal training to make collage. Anyone can do it. Art could now be made by everyone, not by one. And, that also led to questions of authenticity and the authority of the artist. If you're making art using found materials, who is really the creator? And, collage also enabled artists to take things from everyday life as well. And as with everything experimental, avant-garde, or, cool, it always gets co-opted. And collage very quickly was being used for, government propaganda. See that in a lot of the Soviet constructivist work, American advertising, with consumer culture. I mean, collage is so wrapped up in material culture as well, so it's not a surprise. No, today I'd say, we're living in an age where we're drenched with sensory noise, particularly images and sounds. It's so dominant now that we don't know what's real and what's fake. We're essentially living in Plato's cave, where we're experiencing mediated images of experience rather than experiencing life itself. We're in a time defined by fragmentation and disconnect. And it's likely no coincidence that the use of collage art emerged during similarly discordant times. The first collage artists emerged during the early 20th century in a world of seemingly constant war, poverty, oppression. It was also rooted in the age of consumerism and the rise of technologies, cinema, radio, household appliances, all the promises that material things would make your life better. It was a time when, also when people were probably questioning their life and their governments and everything around them. Collage could break through that homogeneous illusion being sold to people and instead unveil the distortions of an often ruptured, discontinuous society. It could reflect the manic, frantic, and complex reality of living in the 20th and now 21st century. And, for some, collage was a way of fighting back against power and disinformation or misinformation. Oh, there's another poor quality image. Buster Keaton's in there somewhere. In terms of our friend, the moving image, we can certainly point to Soviet artists like Esther Shub, Ziga Vertov, Sergei Eisenstein as examples of montage, placing two seemingly disconnected images side by side to create a different emotion, a meaning. That said, I'd argue that Buster Keaton was using montage even before that in films like Sherlock Jr. or his short film, The Playground. It was sort of a compositing, but still, it's a form of collage. Some people say that Joseph Cornell's 1936 film, Rose Hobart, was the first collage film. Cornell cut and re-edited a Hollywood film called East of Borneo, and he turned it into a surrealist short film. I think it's on YouTube somewhere. I haven't watched it. It's not animated though, so it doesn't really, fit in as a collage animation, but certainly Cornell played a big role later on he was a sort of a big inspiration on one of the collage animation legends, Larry Jordan, who we'll talk about a bit later. The first real collage animators, and this is just so far as I can figure, this could change tomorrow, but from what I can see, they really emerged in the mid and late 1950s. And it's interesting that they seem to be predominantly American artists. Not everybody, but at least some of the pioneers here. It's strange because collage art really wasn't a big thing in the US. I think it started to make its way there in the post-World War II era, which is probably, I think some exhibitions were starting to be held in New York, which is probably what triggered this move into collage animation. And again, this might be wrong, but from what I can see, the first collage animation was Robert Breer's A Miracle in 1954, which was a collaboration with Pontus Hultin, this Swedish curator who later became the director of the Pompidou Center in France. And the film, just in short, is you can kind of see by the image, there's a cutout of Pope Pius XII juggling with his own head. after Breer got the ball rolling, the late 50s saw sort of a mini explosion in the use of collage elements in animation. The remarkable Harry Smith, who dabbled in everything. He's most famous probably for his extraordinary anthology of American folk music collection. He made a trio of collage films in 1957, simply titled Film Number 8, 9, 10, and 11. And then he created a feature that might be called Heaven and Earth Magic, though he also just calls it Film Number 12. He was very modest about film titles. Smith's films are deeply rooted in alchemy and magic and the surreal. And in all his works, it feels like chance and improvisation are kind of leading the way more than any sort of pre-planned vision. Stan Vanderbeek made dozens of collage films in the 1950s and 60s. His films used altered clippings from magazines and newspapers to sort of comically critique Cold War politics, gender roles, and consumerism. Outside of the US, Polish animators Jan Lenica and Valerian Borowicz worked with collage elements both together. They made the films Once Upon a Time, which this crappy image is from 1957, and a film called Dome as well. And then individually, Borowicz made The Grandmother's Encyclopedia, among others, and Lenica did Labyrinth. Lenica's work, with its sort of tinges of Buster Keaton and absurdist humor, frequently addresses dehumanized society. His characters encounter various forms of oppression in the face of paranoia, language, exile, humans, and even themselves. And Lenica it's not full-on collage. He uses collage more as a background element to go with his sort of Keaton-esque everyman character. Borow's animation films, I mean, he was all over the place. He did a couple of works that used collage, but he also did live action drawings, collage elements, assemblage, and certainly he had an influence on Svankmeyer's stop motion films. He dabbled with many techniques, and later on he just moved into like live action erotic feature films. I have not seen any of those, so I can't speak to how erotic they are. If there was an award for the longest serving or most dedicated of the collage animators, it would undoubtedly be American Larry Jordan, who is still alive and well and still making work. Jordan's work, he started probably in the early 60s doing collage. He was a friend of Stan Brakhage and had studied under Cornell and was influenced by Max Ernst. Jordan's collage work it's like you're traveling through limbo, through this underworld kind of between death and life. And Jordan always seems to want the subconscious to speak. So it's often hard to pinpoint specific meanings because he's not even sure what he means. And each viewing of his film can kind of lead to radically different interpretations. Before he pretty much went over to drawn animation, British animator Bob Godfrey dabbled with collage. His early films, Do-It-Yourself Animation Kit and The Rise and Fall of Emily Spraud, were influenced by satirical and absurdist comedy like the influential BBC radio show The Goons, which featured, among others, Peter Sellers. Godfrey's work is a bit more linear and narrative driven, although he does frequently satirize politics and sexuality. A lesser known collage animation contributor is another UK artist, Jeff Keane, closer in spirit to Vanderbeek. Keane's films have a modern satirical sensibility as he seeks to try to make sense of the chaos of the here and now. His films Cineblatt and Marvo movie, which you can find on YouTube. They're both from like 1967. They're influenced by comic books, Hollywood B-movies, an assortment of pop culture. And in this sort of rapid fire, playful and defiant manner, Keane's world is kind of one of creation and destruction as he attempts to sort of sort through the chaos of post-war Western society and consumerism. Now, this guy. Probably the most popular and recognizable of collage animators around the globe, Terry Gilliam. influenced by, he was influenced by Vanderbeek, Bob Godfrey, even Borovitz, Gilliam's absurdist biting. And, you know, when I was a kid, naughty collages were, of course, famously featured as part of the TV series Monty Python's Flying Circus. And for many of us as kids watching the show, the animation was the prime attraction, since we had no idea what the sketches were really about, it, you know, when I was 9 or 10. Although at 55, I'm not sure I know what they're about either still. And, you know, as I said earlier, Gilliam's animation was possibly the first sort of unconventional animation that many of us were exposed to as kids, at least alongside Sesame Street would have been another one in North America, which used a lot of independent animators. Sandor Reisenbuchler, whose work I've only just discovered about a month ago, is a Hungarian animator who made a number of colorful collage films that fused folk and pop art. And in the 70s, probably one of the most popular collage films, maybe the first one to win an Oscar, if you care about such things as the Oscars. This was a film called Frank Film, made by a guy named Frank Morris. And unlike the earlier collage animators, Morris's work veered more towards sort of distorted autobiography. It wasn't necessarily an attempt to understand the world, but more the self and the self's place in the world, or the world's place in the self. And just on that note, throughout animation history, we see individual collage examples by artists who generally don't always work with collage elements. Some of these films you'll see in the screening later this week, like George Griffin's Coco, which I think if I was going to pick like one film to say, oh, here's collage animation, it might be that film, which is brilliant. Fast Film by Virgil Wiedrich, Tango by Zbigniew Brzezinski, and there are even elements of Theodore Ushev's work, and notably one that I was involved in, Lipsit Diaries, which I didn't know it at the time, it was only later. Theo took my grandmother's home movies and he resituated them in the life of Arthur Lipsit. So when people see that film, their interpretation of these appropriated images is entirely different from mine. You know, they see figures that are somehow connected, they think connected with the life of Arthur Lipsit. I see my cousins, my aunts, my 5-year-old self in the film. And I love that these little, you know, that harkens back to, again, the roots of collage. These little home movies my grandmother made for her own pleasure have now kind of traveled the world, shifting sort of from hobby to art and from private to public. Not sure she would have liked Lipsit Diaries, but whatever. Another guy who I think is really one of the key figures in collage is Louis Clark. His films are sort of a ruptured intersection between reality, consumerism, memory, and dreamscape. And you know, this seeps through many of the multi-layered collage films he makes. He first began making films in the 1980s and today remains one of the most accomplished collage animators, although he's generally viewed more as, you know, in that experimental film realm and not so much, he's not so much known in the animation world, which I've found a bit baffling. He uses an assortment of found imagery, magazine ads, home movies, contact sheets, pornography, comic books, various sounds. And Clark's characters, it always feels like they're drifting through these sort of disconnected times and spaces, craving a connection, a touch, a voice, or ultimately a sense of self that, like in a dream, always seems to be just out of reach, even though it's right there in front of them. Another American animator who worked with collage was Jim Blanchfield. His early film, Suspicious Circumstances, which this terrible image is stolen from, was made in 1985, and it used color Xeroxes and included photos of real environments along with stills and photos of objects. The film was so well received that Blanchfield was soon hired by all the big musicians to make music videos. So of the Talking Heads, the song And She Was, Michael Jackson's Leave Me Alone, Tears for Fears, Sowing the Seeds of Love, Boy in the Bubble for Paul Simon. all made by Blashfield and all featuring collage elements. And he was an early user of digital compositing. And, again, I see that certainly fits under the collage banner, given that his elements are cut out from their original environments and placed into new ones with other imagery. Now, okay, I'm going to have a sip of my carbonated water here. The 1990s sees the arrival of women making collage films. Why it took so long, I don't know. But both Janie Geiser and Martha Colburn began making collage films in the 1990s. Well, Geiser's work, and Geiser's married to Louis Clark, for anybody who cares about such things. Geiser's work has sort of an unhurried, quiet, and almost film noir feel as it explores gender and sexuality and identity. Martha Colburn's work is more in the Vanderbeek, Jeff Keane realm. It's more manic and frenetic and touches upon an assortment of political, societal, and cultural issues, and just has this sense of urgency and breathlessness and a rawness to it that I particularly like. Employing a collage sensibility along with an innovative use of movement and a general love of the bizarre, British animator and designer Ron Rake's work spanned from the early 90s until his death from cancer in 2012. Rake frequently combined collage, he used photocopies of pop culture images in his incredible film Jukebox, which is made in 95 or something like that. Used comic book illustrations for his 2008 film, The Control Master. And in this image, you see, this is from his 2005 film, Rabbit, where he took illustrations from one of these, I don't know if you have these books there. In North America, they were like Dick and Jane books. And there were these series of illustrated books that were just teaching kids how to behave, basically. Very serious, earnest work. So Rake transformed the English version of these. And as you can maybe see from here, he kind of transformed them dramatically into rather dark and grotesque and horror-filled stories about murder and greed. Fun stuff. Another key collage animator, and again from the UK, is the award winner Osbert Parker, who made the films Yours Truly and Film Noir, among others. He frequently uses innovative mixed media techniques that combine photo cutout animation. He uses a lot of footage, as you can see here, that he takes from old Hollywood movies, and combines it with live action as well, and creates, well, makes impossible landscapes possible. Colburn and Geiser's emergence inspired a new generation of collage animators and women in particular. One of those is Stacey Steers, and you'll see one of her films this week as well. She uses imagery from silent films, Edward Muybridge, along with thousands of handmade collages, and does this to sort of excavate the turbulent mental and emotional inner landscapes of women thrust into roles and selves that they didn't choose. There's a restlessness and unsettledness about her films as her characters battle these demons of doubt and creatures of anxiety and hesitancy in search of some semblance of inner peace. Another key collage animator, and arguably the most diverse, is Jody Mack, again from the US. I'll just list the things she's used: film strips, weeds, concert posters, maps, boarding passes, jewelry, photo negatives, envelopes, dollar store gifts, gift bags, beads, books, blankets, puppets, floral patterns, fabrics of all shades and colors, computer memory boards, junk mail, and even a horse's kidney stone. All stuff you might stumble upon in some sort of bizarre garage heap. Or in Harry Smith's basement, probably. Not something you'd normally see in animation films. Jody Mack is kind of like animation's Dr. Frankenstein, the ultimate recycler. She finds beauty and repurpose in life's leftovers and kind of breathes new life into the forgotten, the discarded, and the unconventional. And I think the image above here these are based on these gift bags she bought at, like, some dollar store. Now, some of the other key collage animators, these are contemporary people. And again, they're people who aren't that well known, and even in our little animation festival community. Kelly Sears and Kelly Gallagher, whose works frequently critique elements of American history and politics. Kathleen Quillian, who playfully explores the metaphysical world. There's Lisa Barcy, there's Mia Matrejak, whose work utilizes collage in short films, but also installations. There's the garage band punk collage films of Xander Marrow. And there's music videos of Canadian Winston Hacking, whose work is both sort of nostalgic and satirical of the hefty promises of consumer capitalism. Other prominent international collage animators, Lele, who many of you probably know, and there's two Croatian artists, Marko Tadic and Dalibor Beric. Lele creates or recreates, in some cases, environments that fuse magic realism, science fiction, comic books, and video games into these visually delicious, handmade candy color worlds that are sort of naive and hopeful and nostalgic. And throughout his work, Lele lovingly celebrates the marginalized, misunderstood, and forgotten, kind of resuscitating them with a new air of hope, purpose, and humanity. Shuffling documentary, animation, history, and science fiction, Tadic's films look to the past, but not necessarily a past that existed. In his films, he imagines utopia or a world with two moons, an unhappy immortal. There's a sense of loss, a ghostly vibe throughout his work, yet frequently Tadic seems to be toying with us because the loss isn't necessarily real. It's only sort of imagined. And you can see a bit of one example of, not the best example of Tadic's work on the right side of the screen. He often uses vintage postcards that he finds in flea markets in Zagreb and draws on the postcards as well. So he constructs this sort of imaginary past. And then Beric, Dalibor Beric, has got this massive body of work, like hundreds of films. I've just started to explore it. But from what I've watched so far, he seems to deal with political and social systems with an element of horror and science fiction influence. And his work kind of carries echoes of the sort of relaxed and cerebral nature of Louis Clare's work. And in fact, you could argue that collage animation has never been more popular, at least in animation today. Along the way, I think collage has really pushed the boundaries of animation by incorporating other artistic forms, whether it's photography, live action, experimental cinema, literature, found objects, found sound, the list goes on. All this while exploring an array of social, cultural, and political issues. And what's equally fascinating, as I sort of mentioned before, is that despite working within animation, a lot of the collage animators often seem to reside on the outskirts at the intersection of animation and experimental cinema, which also might be why there's been kind of a lack of focus on collage animation. Now, another aspect of collage that is maybe more of a modern trend is the interest in recycling. We're living in an age where we toss anything we don't need, don't want. We don't repair, we just replace. Jody Mack, as I previously mentioned, and that's an image from one of her films on the right there with the computer, the chipboard. She's one of the best examples of that recycling element, which is both a political and artistic action. It's at once a critique on capitalism and our disposable culture, but artistic in the sense that she finds beauty and new purpose in the discarded. Even though, all this stuff does eventually still get discarded. It only stays alive on the screen, unless she's got a massive hoarding problem that I don't know about. Lele tends towards the recycling of human experiences and memories in two of his films, co-directed with Thomas Sauvin and on during the screening, you'll see, I believe it's recycled, I put in there. In recycled and hand-colored #2, they take these old photographs just found in Chinese junk shops and flea markets, just personal Polaroids of strangers, and they breathe new life into them. In the film Recycling, it's in the form of a train that's composed of film strips, and it starts to appear as though the train is carrying all these forgotten voices forward. And in hand-colored, hundreds of photos are used to tell the story of one individual's life from birth to death. But what's interesting, and you can see a little bit of that on the left side of the screen, because it was also an installation. What's interesting is that each photo is of a different person and different experience. In both films, when you consider China's kind of tricky history with regards to human rights, these are voices forgotten, maybe silenced or erased, but they're all being brought forward and given this new existence. And like Jody Mac-Lele is a diver. He dives into the dustbins of history and breathes this new life into the discarded and forgotten. Another aspect of collage that's maybe a more modern trend, I read the wrong part. Then it makes sense now that collage has become more prominent. Not only has digital technology tools made the arduous process easier, but we're living in an age where everything and anything can be manipulated. Editing can be used to make GIFs, memes, deep fakes, and what magazine doesn't adjust a model's physical features to fit in with some bullshit body image standards? We're so saturated, though, with manipulated imagery. Can collage even combat a world where images are being appropriated and distorted every second? The roots of collage art were linked with critiquing, deconstructing the prevailing values of society, with criticizing war, technology, capitalism, consumerism, all the damn isms. Has it really changed anything? It was co-opted so quickly by commercial interests that it appears to have lost its defiant character quite early on. Does collage even have any relevance anymore? Has it just returned to its hobby roots made for personal pleasure? Or does collage remain a vital and important weapon for fighting those who distort the world for rather nefarious purposes? And that is an answer I don't have. And in the end, aren't we all just talking, walking, breathing, and farting collages? How many of our daily words, reactions, dreams, movements, and gestures, how many of them are just borrowed consciously or unconsciously from experiences around us? How many of our hopes and expectations in life are formed or misinformed by movies, television, mass media, or by those around us, friends, families, colleagues? Heck, our fashion could be argued to be collage. I got pants from, Italy. I got shoes from Spain. I got earrings from Northern Canada. They're all brought from their original context to a new landscape and a new meaning. When it comes down to it, I'd say our entire life is a collage. Everything we do is a collage, a pastiche, a mix and match, a beautiful and ugly buffet of sights and thoughts and sounds. And that's the end of my speaking. I just wanted to thank my wife, Yelena Popovich, for putting the keynote thing together for me. I was just going to speak without all these pictures, but she felt it would be sexier with images. She didn't say that, though. And all these images are appropriately used without permission.
Okay, thank you very much.
All right, are we back to me now?
Yes, yes, yes. We are looking at you at the moment. Just to get now. Okay, you can hear us. Just going to see if anybody has a question for you. All right, okay.
Alguém tem alguma questão que queira colocar ao Chris? Any question?
That was a lot to take in, sorry.
Yes. Okay.
It was like a collage, just a barrage of stuff.
Can you come here? Are you have a question? No. Oh yes, you do.
Just a minute, please.
Hello. Hi.
Hello.
Hi. It's not really a question, it's more of a remark that when I was hearing you, I thought like in the 80s, you said that more women started to do collages. And I remember the Guerrilla Girls, which was a group of women that started to have a more feminist counteraction, and they used a lot of collage because they used the consumerism imagery, and they used it to do their guerrilla actions. So I thought I just remembered, so this is more of a note than a
Right.
question. Yeah.
Yeah, if there are people who are thinking of somebody that I'm not remembering, it's entirely possible. I gave a talk in Zagreb in June, and I've already changed it to add some people that I'd completely forgotten were working with collage.
So Chris, I think that this is all. Thank you very much for sharing your story also and your knowledge with us. And it was really a pleasure to have you here. Okay, thank you
you.
very much.
I'm
Thank
sure
you.
it'll make a lot more sense when you see the screening. So,
I know. Thank you very much.
all right, thank you.
Very much.